My mother-in-law slammed the door in my face and sneered, "This is not your house, it's ours." The sting of her words cut deeper than the lock clicking behind me. I stood on my own porch, holding the keys I had paid for, realizing they no longer meant control. Through the security camera, I watched her and my husband walk around inside as if I didn't exist. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I smiled instead. Because while they believed they had taken everything from me, they had unknowingly given me the perfect weapon to destroy them. The night after my mother-in-law slammed the door on me, I tried to tell myself it was an isolated outburst, a moment of anger I could forgive and forget. But deep down, I knew something inside my marriage had cracked. I was 33, a marketing director who had spent years clawing my way up in a ruthless industry. Buying this house had been my triumph, my symbol of independence. Yet, within months of moving in, I felt like a guest in my own home. At first, it was subtle. A vase I swore I had placed on the right side of the mantel suddenly appeared on the left. A drawer that should have been closed stood open when I returned from work. The grocery receipts carried items I hadn't purchased, tucked between my usual staples. And David, my husband of 4 years, had an uncanny way of dismissing my concerns. "You're overworked, Em. You probably just forgot." His voice carried the lilt of reassurance, but his eyes always avoided mine when he said it. The words that haunted me most, though, didn't come from David. They came from his mother. She called every morning and every night, her voice like a dagger wrapped in honey. "You're too independent, Emma. Men don't like women who think they don't need them." Sometimes she laughed as if it were a joke, but I could feel the venom beneath the humor. I tried to push it aside, but each time I hung up the phone, a chill ran down my spine. One Saturday afternoon, I returned home to find the garage door already open. My heart stuttered in my chest. I knew I had closed it. Inside, nothing seemed stolen, but the order of my shelves had shifted. A picture frame from my office was lying flat on the counter. David shrugged when I asked, "You probably left it open. You can be forgetful sometimes." Forgetful, overreacting, sensitive. These words became his weapons, subtle enough to sting without leaving bruises. I wrote them down in a notebook I kept tucked under my mattress. At first, it was just a list of small things, but soon the pages filled with dates, times, and quotes that sounded harmless on the surface, yet gnawed at my sanity. The moment of truth arrived on a rainy Thursday evening. I reached for my umbrella in the closet and found a duplicate set of house keys dangling on a chain with a charm I had never seen before. I froze. When I asked David about it, his reply was too quick, too rehearsed. "Oh, Mom just wanted a spare in case of emergencies." "She worries about us." In that moment, the floor beneath me shifted. Emergencies? Since when did my mother-in-law need access to my bedroom closet, my private desk drawers, my life? I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but David's calm tone made me doubt myself again. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it really was harmless. That night, I cried in my car. I parked 2 blocks away from the house and let the sobs tear through me, muffling them into my sleeve so no neighbor would see. For the first time, I admitted it to myself. I was being betrayed. Not just by my mother-in-law, who had crossed boundaries no one should cross, but by the man I loved who let it happen. The next day, I bought a set of discreet security cameras. I told David they were for safety. After all, the neighborhood wasn't perfect. But inside, I knew the truth. I was building my own witness, an unblinking eye that couldn't be gaslit or silenced. I hid the receivers in a locked drawer at work, far from anyone's reach. 2 weeks later, I watched in disbelief as the footage played across my phone. My mother-in-law entered with the key I hadn't given her, her face lit with smug satisfaction. She rifled through my dresser drawers, holding up my clothes as if assessing their worth. And behind her stood David, not stopping her, not protesting, just watching. When she laughed, he laughed too, awkward and complicit. I replayed the clip until my stomach turned. Then I reached for my notebook and wrote down the time, the date, the exact words she muttered. "She thinks this place is hers, silly girl." That night, I drove aimlessly until the city lights blurred into streaks of color through my tears. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had imagined. It wasn't just an invasion of space, it was an invasion of self. My home, the one place I thought I was safe, had become a stage where I was the fool and they were the audience. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and whispered to the empty car, "Why are you doing this to me?" But no answer came, only the silence of my own realization. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen. "They've done this before. You're not the first." My heart lurched, and the tears stopped cold. The betrayal I thought was personal suddenly seemed much bigger. If they had done this before, how far would they go this time? I stared at the glowing words, my fingers trembling. I didn't know who had sent the message, but I knew one thing with terrifying certainty. I was standing on the edge of something far darker than I had imagined. The text from the unknown number haunted me all night. I stared at it until the letters burned into my eyelids. They've done this before. Before who? To whom? The thought made me sick, but it also ignited something sharper. Resolve. If they thought I would keep doubting myself forever, they were wrong. The next morning, I drove to a hardware store miles away from home and bought more cameras, the kind small enough to disappear behind picture frames and inside air vents. By noon, I had installed 3 of them, each placed where I knew my mother-in-law's eyes would wander: my dresser, my desk, the locked cabinet in the hallway. I tucked the recording device in my purse and carried it to work. No one would ever touch it there. Days passed, and the house became my stage of surveillance. Each night, I watched the reels like a private detective, piecing together the fragments of betrayal. At first, it was the same pattern. My mother-in-law rummaging, David trailing behind like a guilty shadow. But then I caught something new, words that froze my blood. "I told you the deed is in her name," David whispered, glancing nervously toward the kitchen camera. "And if we don't fix that soon," his mother snapped, "she'll leave you with nothing." The conversation was brief, but it was enough. They weren't just invading my space. They were plotting to take what was legally mine, the house I had poured years of work into. I replayed the clip, each word sharpening into a blade. If you were in my place, would you keep silent to protect the shell of a marriage, or would you fight to protect yourself? I already knew my answer. The next step was dangerous, but I couldn't fight alone. I booked an appointment with a lawyer, a woman named Claire recommended by a colleague. Sitting in her office, I felt both exposed and protected. I handed her a flash drive loaded with the videos, my fingers trembling as if releasing a part of myself. She watched a few minutes in silence, then turned to me. "You have enough to start building a case," she said evenly, "but it won't be easy. If we move forward, you need to understand. David and his mother will come after you harder than ever." Her words should have frightened me, but instead they steadied me. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't imagining things. I had evidence, and now I had someone willing to wield it with me. Still, Claire urged me to take care of my own mind. "They've been gaslighting you. That takes a toll. I want you to speak with someone I trust." Which is how I found myself sitting across from Dr. Patel, a psychologist with kind eyes and a sharper insight than I was prepared for. She didn't ask me to justify myself. Instead, she said, "What they're doing isn't about love, it's about control. You've been conditioned to question your own reality." Her words cracked something inside me, and the tears came hot and sudden. But with each session, I felt the fog of self-doubt lifting. Not long after, I reconnected with Marcus, an old friend from college who now worked in cybersecurity. Over coffee, I told him everything. His face darkened. "Send me the files. I'll make sure you have backups on servers they'll never touch." He leaned closer, his voice low. "And Emma, if they're stupid enough to use their phones or email, I'll find it." For the first time, I felt the outline of a safety net beneath me. Claire with the law, Dr. Patel with my sanity, Marcus with the technology. I wasn't alone anymore, but the biggest shock came from within David's own family. One evening, while leaving Claire's office, a woman approached me in the parking lot. It was David's cousin, Anna. She looked around nervously before slipping an envelope into my hand. "They did the same thing to my sister years ago," she whispered. "We tried to fight back, but without proof, we lost everything. Don't let them win this time." Inside the envelope were photocopies of old court records, documents that painted a chilling picture of a pattern spanning years, property disputes, financial manipulation. Always the same names: David's mother, and whichever relative had been unlucky enough to stand in her way. I sat in a cafe later that night, hands shaking as I sifted through the pages. Around me, people laughed, cups clinked. Life moved on as if the world wasn't collapsing around me. And yet, amidst the panic, something fierce began to grow. A sense of clarity, of purpose. I looked at my reflection in the cafe window. My face was pale, eyes rimmed red, but my gaze didn't waver. For the first time in months, I saw not a victim but a woman sharpening herself into a weapon. My phone buzzed. A message from Claire. "We're moving forward, but Emma, you need to decide. Are you prepared to risk the marriage? Because once this begins, there's no going back." I stared at the screen, the noise of the cafe fading around me. Did I dare burn the bridge to the life I thought I wanted, to the man I once believed in? The answer rose inside me like steel. After that night in the cafe, after staring at Claire's message until the letters blurred, I realized my fight was no longer about whether I could expose them. It was about when. Timing mattered more than rage, more than fear. If I wanted to win, I had to wear the mask of the perfect wife a little longer. So I cooked dinner. I laughed at David's jokes even when they made my skin crawl. I agreed to Sunday brunches with his mother, sitting across from her polished smile while she slipped in jabs disguised as concern. "You work too much, Emma. A woman like you should be grateful to have a husband who supports her." I nodded, smiled, and let her words sink like stones into the pit of my stomach. Inside, I was screaming. Outside, I was calm. The hardest part wasn't enduring her. It was enduring David. Every time he brushed a hand across my shoulder, every time he kissed my cheek goodnight, I had to remind myself, he wasn't just complicit. He was planning. He had chosen her over me long before I noticed. Some nights, when I thought I couldn't bear the charade any longer, I would curl on the living room floor with Bailey, our terrier. His tiny body pressed against mine, his heartbeat steady and pure, reminded me I wasn't alone. Stroking his fur became my anchor, my proof that not everything in my life was poisoned. Those quiet moments gave me strength to keep playing the role I hated. And then, one night, the mask nearly slipped. I came home late from work, dropped my purse on the couch, and turned on the monitor. The feed from the living room camera filled the screen. My mother-in-law leaned close to David, her voice sharp but hushed. "It's time. She's too comfortable. We need to act before she notices." My chest tightened. Act? Act? How? David nodded, his jaw tense. "I'll start the paperwork this week." My hand froze on the mouse. Paperwork. What paperwork? The words, "it's time," looped in my head like a curse. The next morning, I began documenting with a new precision. Not just dates and times, but patterns. Every time David flinched when finances came up. Every time his mother's tone shifted from syrupy to steel. Slowly, the shape of their scheme unfolded before me. It wasn't just about controlling me. It was about stripping me of everything. They were working on transferring ownership of the house into the name of David's company, a company I had no rights to, no claim over. I found myself staring at the file cabinet late one night, hands trembling as I pieced the puzzle together. If they succeeded, they could throw me out with nothing. The house I had bled for, the home I thought I had built, it would become theirs on paper as if I had never existed. The betrayal was no longer emotional. It was financial, calculated, cruel. And that cruelty gave me clarity. I sat at my desk and began to draft scenarios, each one like a war plan. If they denied everything, release the videos. If they claimed I was unstable, call Dr. Patel to testify. If they pushed the paperwork through, file an injunction immediately with Claire. Each page of my notebook became an arsenal, Every contingency a bullet I could fire when the time was right. Still, there were moments I wavered. Sometimes, watching David sleep beside me, I remembered the man I thought I had married, the one who made me laugh on our first date, who held me when my father passed away. I wondered if somewhere inside him, that man still existed. But then the memory of his silence in those videos crushed that hope. Love doesn't stand by while someone destroys you. And so I wrote. In the quiet of midnight, under the dim glow of a lamp, I scribbled in my journal, "Tomorrow, I will not be the victim anymore." The ink bled into the page, final and unshakable. I closed the notebook, set it beside the camera feeds, and let my breath steady. They thought they were the hunters. They didn't know I had already built the trap. The moment came on a gray Saturday afternoon when the world outside was quiet and the only sound in my living room was the low hum of the heater. I checked the camera feeds out of habit, expecting the same invasion, the same smug walk through my home. But this time, the screen froze me in place. My mother-in-law was kneeling in front of my safe. The safe I kept hidden beneath a false panel in the bedroom closet, the one only David and I knew about. She tugged at it, her hands steady, as if this was not the first time she had done it. David stood behind her, pale and tense. He didn't stop her. He didn't even flinch when she finally pried it open with a small tool. My stomach clenched as I watched her pull out a manila envelope, the property deed to my house, still crisp in its plastic sleeve. She held it up to the light and smirked. "This is it," she whispered. David's voice was barely audible, but the words carved into me like knives. "Once this is signed over, she'll have no ground left." I dropped the phone, my breath ragged. My hands shook so violently I pressed them against my knees just to stop them. That deed was proof of every sacrifice I had made, every sleepless night, every deal I had closed to afford this house. Watching it in her hands like a prize she had already won broke something inside me. In the dark of my room, I collapsed onto the floor. Tears came hard and hot, streaking down my face, blurring the screen. For a moment, I wanted to give in, to let the weight crush me. But then Bailey patted over, nudged my hand with his wet nose, and whimpered. I pulled him into my lap, buried my face into his fur, and whispered, "Enough, it's enough." When I lifted my head, my tears had dried, leaving only a cold clarity. The time for patience was over. That night, I sent the video to Claire with trembling fingers. An hour later, her email reply flashed on my screen. Complaint drafted. Lawsuit prepared. 10 million in damages. All we need is your confirmation. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling a breath that felt like it had been trapped in me for years. I clicked reply, typed one word, yes, and hit send. The next morning, Claire arranged for me to meet with the police. The footage of my mother-in-law opening the safe, holding the deed, whispering about stripping me of everything. I didn't need to explain much. The officers watched in silence, their jaws tight. When the clip ended, one of them looked at me and said, "We'll escort you." By late afternoon, I was sitting in the back of a patrol car, heading toward the house where David had grown up. The house his mother ruled like a kingdom. My palms were sweaty, my heartbeat a drum in my ears. But beneath the nerves, there was a strange calm. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting anymore. I was moving. When we pulled up, my mother-in-law was on the porch, her arms folded, lips pressed into a thin line. David appeared behind her, his face pale as he spotted the uniformed officer stepping out of the car. "Emma, what are you doing?" His voice cracked, brittle with fear. I didn't answer. Instead, I handed the officer the folder Claire had given me, packed with evidence, the videos, the transcripts, the financial documents Anna had slipped to me. They walked past me toward the porch, their presence impossible to ignore. My mother-in-law sneered. "This is ridiculous. She's unwell, she imagines things." The officer played the clip on a tablet, the sound of her voice filling the cold air. "Once this is signed over, she'll have no ground left." Her face blanched. For the first time, I saw her composure crack. David turned to me then, his eyes wide, and in a move so desperate it almost looked rehearsed, he dropped to his knees on the porch. Emma, please, we can fix this. Mom just... She didn't mean... I stared at him, my face a mask. There had been a time when his pleas might have broken me, when I would have reached for him despite everything. That time was gone. I said nothing. The silence was louder than any scream. The officers exchanged a glance, then one turned to me. Ma'am, we'll need you to come with us now. The words hung heavy in the air, carrying with them both relief and dread. This was no longer private, no longer a shadow war hidden behind closed doors. It was public, official, unstoppable. And as I followed them toward the car, I thought, this is only the beginning. The days after the police visit felt like stepping into a storm that only grew darker with each hour. My mother-in-law wasted no time striking back. She called every relative within reach, spinning the story with the ease of someone who had practiced it for years. According to her, I was unstable, paranoid, delusional. She told them I was inventing stories to cover up my own failures as a wife. David followed her lead. He called friends we had shared dinners with, neighbors who had once waved warmly at me across the lawn. Emma hasn't been well, he murmured into the phone, his voice soft with feigned concern. She's been seeing things, imagining conspiracies. Please, pray for her. Soon, whispers crawled through the cracks of my life. A colleague at work asked if I was all right, her tone edged with pity. An aunt I barely spoke to left a voicemail, pleading with me to get help. The weight of their manufactured story pressed down on me until I could hardly breathe. One night, I sat in my office long after everyone had gone home, the hum of the fluorescent lights echoing in the empty space. The loneliness was crushing. For a moment, I wondered if this was what they wanted all along, to isolate me so completely that even I would start questioning my sanity. My hands shook as I buried my face in them. Then my phone buzzed. A single message lit up the screen. Don't worry, they've already buried themselves. I stared at the words, my chest tightening with equal parts fear and hope. Who was sending these? Whoever it was, they knew something I didn't. And then, as if on cue, an email arrived from Marcus. Attached was a video file I had never seen before. I opened it, heart pounding. The footage showed my mother-in-law and David sitting at the dining table, stacks of papers spread before them. Her voice was sharp, impatient. Once we sell the house under the company's name, she won't have a single claim. Do you understand? Everything will belong to us. David nodded, his hands trembling as he scribbled his signature. She'll never find out. She trusts me too much. The words hit me like ice water. They weren't just planning to steal my house. They were planning to erase me, to cut me out of my own life as if I had never existed. The next morning, I walked into Claire's office with the video queued up on a flash drive. She watched silently, her lips tightening, her pen scratching furious notes across a legal pad. When the clip ended, she looked up, her eyes glinting with something between fury and satisfaction. Emma, she said, her voice steady, they've just handed us the weapon we needed. I nodded, my throat dry. Claire wasted no time. By the end of the day, copies of the video were in the hands of the police, the court, and, most importantly, members of David's extended family who had been swayed by his lies. The fallout was immediate. At the next family gathering, whispers turned into arguments. Cousins and uncles who had stood firm behind my mother-in-law now demanded answers. "How could you do this to her?" someone shouted. The fortress she had built began to crumble from the inside, and then came the twist that made everything fall into place. Late that night, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. When I answered, the voice was hesitant but familiar. "Emma, it's Daniel." It took me a moment to place the name, David's older brother, estranged from the family for years. "I was the one who sent the messages," he admitted, "and the video. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. She ruined my life once. I won't let her do it to you." I gripped the phone, stunned. Daniel told me how their mother had manipulated him years ago, tricking him into signing away his share of the family inheritance. When he tried to fight back, she destroyed his reputation, leaving him isolated and broke. He had been waiting for the moment someone else would stand up to her. "You have the chance I never had," he said quietly. "Use it." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The pieces slid together. The anonymous texts, the envelope of records, the sudden new video. Daniel had been my silent ally all along. When I told Claire, she leaned back in her chair, a small smile curving her lips. They've committed fraud, theft, conspiracy. This isn't just a civil case anymore. Emma, they've made the biggest mistake of their lives. Her words echoed in my chest, a drumbeat of vindication. For months, I had been made to feel like I was losing my mind. But now, the truth was out, undeniable, irreversible. They hadn't destroyed me. They had destroyed themselves. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and nerves. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands resting on the thick folder of evidence Claire had prepared. Every page felt like a weapon sharpened from my pain, every video a dagger forged from betrayal. My heart pounded, but my spine remained straight. Months of silence, patience, and hidden tears had brought me here. When the judge entered, the room rose to its feet, then fell into hushed stillness. My eyes flicked across the room. David sat stiffly beside his mother, both dressed in expensive suits that could not disguise the strain in their faces. His hand twitched against the table, tapping a nervous rhythm. She, in contrast, held herself upright with the arrogance of someone who still believed she could win by sheer force of will. Claire began her opening statement, steady and unflinching. She laid out the pattern of manipulation, the trespassing, the theft. Then she pressed play on the first video. The screen filled with the image of my mother-in-law entering my bedroom, the sound of the key turning in the lock echoing through the silent courtroom. The jurors leaned forward, their faces taut with disbelief. The footage showed her rifling through my drawers, David hovering in the background, and then came her voice, sharp and smug. She thinks this place is hers. Silly girl. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I forced myself to keep my eyes on the screen, though my throat tightened. Video after video followed. My mother-in-law opening my safe, lifting the deed. David's whispered agreement. Once this is signed over, she'll have no ground left. Each clip was another nail driven into their facade, each word proof that I had not been crazy, not paranoid, but painfully, dangerously correct. When the final video ended, the silence was suffocating. Then the judge's gavel struck once, sharp as thunder. David shifted in his seat, sweat glistening at his hairline. Then, as if some inner dam had broken, he leaned forward, his voice desperate. "It wasn't me, Your Honor. I never wanted any of this. It was my mother. She pushed me. She's been controlling me my entire life." The courtroom gasped, but before anyone could absorb his words, his mother exploded. "You coward!" she spat, turning on him with venom. "You signed those papers. You agreed to it all. Don't you dare pin this on me." Their argument spiraled into chaos, each word a public confession. David's face twisted with fear as he hurled accusations, while she lashed back with fury, exposing every sordid detail they had once worked so hard to conceal. I stood silently, watching them devour each other under the weight of their greed. All those years they had spent weaving a web of control only to strangle themselves with it. The judge's gavel struck again, demanding order. His voice cut through the chaos. "Enough! This court has heard sufficient evidence. The verdict is clear." The words that followed washed over me like a tide. The court recognized the theft, the conspiracy, the damages. $10 million awarded. The property deed restored entirely to my name. Protective orders granted. I closed my eyes, let the breath I'd been holding for months finally leave my chest, and whispered under my breath, "Justice, at last." For a moment, the room blurred, not with tears, but with the dizzying clarity of freedom. When the session ended, I walked past David without looking at him. His eyes followed me, wide and hollow, but I gave him nothing. My mother-in-law muttered curses under her breath, her face twisted with rage. But I didn't flinch. Their voices no longer had power over me. Outside, the sunlight felt different, brighter, as if the world itself had shifted. Claire squeezed my shoulder, her eyes warm. "You did it," she said softly. I nodded, unable to find words, my throat thick with emotion. Weeks passed and the dust of the trial settled. The house was mine again, not just in name, but in spirit. I changed the locks, painted the walls, filled the rooms with colors and laughter they could never erase. Each corner that had once felt tainted now became a symbol of resilience. Work blossomed. Freed from the chains of constant anxiety, my focus sharpened. I launched a campaign at my company that garnered national attention, and with it came promotions, opportunities, respect. But more than that, I found my voice outside the office. I began speaking at women's shelters, telling my story not as a tale of victimhood, but as proof of what could be reclaimed. I watched their eyes as I spoke, saw the flicker of recognition, the silent tears, the sparks of hope. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about showing others that escape was possible, that dignity could be rebuilt. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of gold, I sat on the porch with Bailey curled beside me. The air was warm, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine from the garden. I let the quiet settle into me, deep and healing. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the sound of a door unlocking that wasn't mine. I traced the new keys on the table with my fingers, smiling at the simplicity of them. Only I had copies now. They were more than metal and grooves. They were symbols of sovereignty, of a life wrested back from those who had tried to erase me. I thought of David, of his mother, of the way greed had hollowed them out until there was nothing left but venom and desperation. Their hunger for power had consumed them, destroyed their family, and nearly broken me. But greed, like fire, always burns itself out eventually. The world grew quiet around me as the last rays of sun slid behind the horizon. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and let the peace settle in. Anger, envy, greed, they can destroy families, I murmured, more to myself than to anyone else. But justice always finds its way. I opened my eyes, and for the first time in a long while, the future didn't look frightening. It looked vast. It looked mine.